You are watching GrassRoots Community Television, helping you make television people watch everywhere. Broadcasting on cable channel 82 in Glenwood Springs and Carbondale, and channel 12 in Aspen, Snowmass, Basalt, and Elgin. Free over-the-air broadcasts throughout the Roaring Fork Valley. All programs can be watched anytime, anywhere at grassrootstv.org.
Good evening. Welcome to Naturalist Nights. Thanks all for coming tonight. My name is Daniel Grant. I'm a naturalist here at ACES. The goal of Naturalist Nights is to foster dialogue and share knowledge about the natural world among a wide variety of community members. And based on the turnout tonight, it really seems like we're just doing that. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I have a couple of acknowledgments and announcements. Thank you to GrassRoots TV for broadcasting tonight's talk, and to Two Leaves and a Bud for providing the tea that we're all enjoying. Looking ahead to next week's Naturalist Night, we'll be showing a documentary entitled Green Fire, Aldo Leopold, and a Land Ethic for Our Time at ACES on Thursday, the 26th of January at 7:30 p.m. Feel free to check the brochure or the website for all upcoming Naturalist Nights. And as a quick aside, if you didn't get a chance to sign your name and email on the forms outside, you'll get a chance after the talk. Just to get feedback for future Naturalist Nights. As a former environmental studies major myself, I personally feel honored to introduce tonight's speaker. Having read his work and seen how his ideas have shaped conservation over the past few decades. Currently a resident of Crested Butte, he's a professor emeritus of history and environmental studies and a founder of the Environmental Studies Department at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He's been at the forefront of teaching and writing about environmental history and ethics, and his ideas about the relationship between humans and nature have transformed environmental philosophy and public awareness towards wilderness and conservation. In addition to his academic career, he's an avid river runner, having guided or led over 60 descents of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon and a first descent of the Tuolumne River in California. His life and work, which blends scholarship, observation, and insight with recreation, adventure, and discovery, I think beautifully informs the work that ACES does. Please join me in welcoming Rod Nash.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much. Do I have to use that?
No, you
don't have to use that. Okay. Here are these. Thank you, Dan. I don't think I'm going to need this for the television. So I have to actually hold. You don't need it. Don't need it. Okay. I'm so happy to be here in this tradition of Naturalist Nights. You have some wonderful programs coming up. Peter McBride speaking, Ian Billick is speaking from our side of the mountains. We call that the poor side of the mountains over there in Crested Butte. And Ian's coming to talk later on, and I'm so impressed with this organization, the Wilderness Workshop, ACES. I think I spoke maybe 25 years ago at the very beginning of ACES, as I recall, somewhere down here. As I walked through the snowy road thinking of the path not taken, I thought, I've been here before, and it was fun to be back. Thank you for the kind words about the book. Wilderness and the American Mind is, I think, a good book, but it's also a very lucky book. In other words, I wrote this book, finished my PhD dissertation when I was 25 years old in 1964. A good year to write about wilderness, wasn't it? The year of the Wilderness Act, the year when wild and scenic rivers were being discussed, when Grand Canyon dams were being fought, when people were becoming very interested in environmentalism. And so the book was lucky. People have said it was a book that changed the world. But I say the world was ready to be changed, and the book may have helped a little bit. I also like to reflect on the fact that it's nice to talk about wilderness in a part of the country that has some wilderness. I sometimes talk in Dallas, I sometimes talk in Cincinnati, you know. It's nice to be here. Just to get a little sense of this group, because this is pretty a special group here. How many people in this room have climbed all 54 of the Colorado 14ers? 14ers! Very nice. I see about 5 hands. How many people in this room have run the Colorado River through Grand Canyon, 225 miles? How many people have done both? The mouse has, the danger mouse right here, and you too, sir. Very nice. My friend Arlene Edwards is here, makes every occasion special for me, and she has done both of those things. So this is not the first rodeo for a lot of you people, and we're going to get into some, I think, some exciting ideas as we continue to talk. What I'm going to do initially is talk a little bit about the meaning of wilderness, about definitions, about what wilderness is, and about changing attitudes toward it. And then we're going to have some fun with slides. We're going to look at some stuff that's going to reinforce a few points that I've made, and it's going to be fun to look at, I think. And then we're going to get serious, look a bit at the future, and talk about the role of wilderness in the future of this planet and our species. And if we have any time left, we might have a little Q&A at the end. But we're going to start out with a little bit on the definition of wilderness. And let's think about this. Word wilderness, the most important part of that word is the word will. Okay? An old English word, will. You've heard it before, a last will and testament, right? It's an important word. Last will and testament. This is not just something casual. This is someone's will. We have this expression, free will. Do something of your own free will. Someone's supposed to witness, maybe, when you wrote a last will and testament, that you did it of your own free will. And we talk about will. We have the concept of a willful child, right? We have a concept of someone who has or wills something. Where there's a will, there's relatives. So what we see is the word will as an adjective becoming the word wild. Okay? Something that has its own will is not, important word here, controlled, is wild. Okay? A pitcher who has lost control, said to be wild. He's a wild pitcher. He has no control of the ball. So from will to wild to the idea of self-willed land. Wilderness, something that has its own will, that is not controlled. Very important concept here. The idea of Howard Zonnheiser in 1964 was the word untrammeled in the Wilderness Act. He used the term untrammeled. A trammel is a trap or a device, a hobble that controls something that is wild, that in a sense breaks the will of something that is wild. So untrammeled, used in that 64 Act, was a very appropriate word talking about wilderness. Now let's just think for a little bit about ways to and not to define wilderness. Let's see if I have a little laser light here. This will blind you if it hits you, but don't worry. This is the way a lot of people think about wilderness, and this is the way we kind of look at it politically, and we look at it on a map. Right? We're either in a wilderness, maroon belt snowmass, or we're not in a wilderness. We're in some land that is civilized or C for controlled. Okay? Wilderness and civilization. You park at a trailhead, you walk across a boundary, it says you're now entering the Raggeds Wilderness or the West Elk Wilderness, and you are now in the wilderness. I'd like to suggest to you that it's better to think of wilderness and civilization as qualities that influence an environment. Let's think about this whole square as an environment and here as we punch down, see where that arrow is and this arrow? Here's a place that is largely wild and a little bit controlled, okay? That might be a place like maybe the Grand Canyon or maybe the Brooks Range in Alaska. And then we move this way and we begin to pick up land that is maybe about half wild and half controlled. There's some controlling influences, some evidence of civilization in it, but also some wildness. And we finally get over here to a place, is there any place like this in the world where there's no wildness? Completely gone, not even a weed in a crack of the sidewalk, you know? That would be kind of a sad place, I think. But is there any place like this where it's totally wild? I'm told there's radioactivity on every square inch of the planet put there by nuclear bomb tests. So this allows you to plug in subjectively as you see it. For someone who has a lot of experience in wilderness, you might be placed into an environment like, say, right here, and you might say, well, you know, for me, there's really a lot of control. There are trail signs. I've seen a lot of people today. And you might say, this isn't wilderness to me. Somebody else might come out of New Jersey and say, wow, you know, I just walked in from Clark's Market, and this is wilderness. We just walked through the wilderness. And you know what? For them, it is wilderness because, my friends, wilderness is a state of mind, okay? Big idea I want you to take away. Wilderness is a state of mind. It doesn't really exist. It doesn't exist like a mountain or a canyon, right? There's a river down there. We could all go down there and stand and say, what's that? And we'd say, it's a river, okay? And we'd ask 4 or 5 people, it's a river, it's a river. What's that? It's a mountain. It's Highlands Bowl. That's a mountain, okay? But if you ask somebody what wilderness is, like kind of asking them what happiness is, another ness word, it's going to vary, isn't it? Person to person. One person's wilderness might be another's roadside picnic area. So that subjectivity allows you to plug in here at the top and move that arrow along. And this diagram also suggests the importance of wilderness management in defining wilderness, because the way we access wilderness and the way we manage it, if you have to line up in a lottery to get into a wilderness, takes away a little bit about that wildness, doesn't it? So there are a lot of management concerns that bear on this subject, and I'd like you to take this diagram away from you, away from here tonight, and think a little bit about it. By the way, there was a handout out there. You have it. Professors always have handouts, so if you didn't get one of these one-page op-eds, somebody might find one in the back to hand out to you. Okay, I was in Malaysia talking about wilderness, asking people the meaning of wilderness. I asked a fourth world guy, a guy who didn't have any clothes on except a penis sheath. And he definitely wasn't a member of the first 3 worlds. He was a fourth worlder. And through an interpreter, I said, what's your word for wilderness? And he said, I don't know what, you know, I don't think I have a word for wilderness. And so we went back and forth with this guy. And hunter and gatherer, fourth world. And finally we said, I said through the interpreter, ask the man how he would say, I am lost in the jungle. And the reply came back, tell the white guy, I don't get lost in the jungle. So, you know, he didn't have a word for it. He didn't know wilderness. And that brings me to my next big point, that civilization created wilderness, okay? As a state of mind, as a perceived reality. Not a mountain, not a river. What's wilderness? It's in your mind. It's a quality, as the ness part of it suggests, like happiness, a word like that. It's a quality. So civilization creates wilderness by drawing lines on the map and lines around domesticated species. 100,000 years ago, dogs domesticated. Maybe 10,000 years ago, calves, herding begins, agriculture begins, and suddenly there's a reason, are you following me here, to think about the wild and the civilized, to think about what we control and what is wild. And to think about, important concept here, breaking the will of something. Remember the word will? We started out with that, important will, the root of the word wilderness. Breaking the will. When you break a horse, whether you do it violently in the old school or like Robert Redford did, whispering to it, you are putting the horse under your control, right? Even a fine horsewoman like Shelley and a fine horseman like Al, you know, I don't know if that horse wants to be ridden. Why does that horse want to be ridden? You've broken the will of the horse. No, the horse wants it. The horse loves me. Okay, that's all right too. But breaking a will, breaking a wild animal means breaking will. And so that is what began to happen about 10,000 years ago, and that's when it became possible to think about wilderness and civilization. So now we have something that almost immediately becomes the enemy, becomes dark and terrible and scary. In the Old Testament, which was a document produced by an agricultural society that existed by controlling nature, in the Old Testament, we have the concepts very strong of wilderness and of its antipode, paradise. Wilderness and paradise. Paradise is the word for a garden, a beautiful, luxurious garden where fruit hung from the trees. Wilderness, on the other hand, was harsh and dry and unproductive and scary, and it's what happened when you were bad and you got turned into a salt flat and a wilderness, like the people in Sodom and Gomorrah did. We all know that story. God cursed them by turning them into a wilderness. So in the Bible, those are very important. We did, according to the Old Testament, we occupied as a species for a while a garden called, you know the name, the Garden of Eden, right? In that Garden of Eden were Adam and Eve. And life was good for a while, I believe. But then Adam and Eve sinned, and they were driven out of the garden into what? The wilderness, right? And you can see it in Thomas Cole's paintings. The surging storm clouds, the towering mountain peaks. It looked like the top of Snowmass this afternoon. Big old dark clouds coming in. God said, go out. You guys have blown it. Get out of here. You're going to be sent into the wilderness along with a scapegoat who took all the sins of the community and was driven out into the wilderness by the early herding societies. And so wilderness had pretty strong biases against it in the Old Testament. When the New World was discovered and settled, wilderness suddenly received a kind of a jolt again in our thinking, because suddenly we had wild country. These were Europeans who really hadn't had much wilderness for a long time around them, hadn't thought too much about it, had pretty well controlled things. And then we come to the New World and we have not only wild country, but we have wild people. They called them Indians, all right? That's always a strange term for me. Columbus was lost, thought he was in India, you know? Good thing he wasn't looking for Turkey. So the savages, so-called, the savages were there, and you might say, well, they were already people here, so it wasn't a wilderness, but in the minds of the colonists, the savages contributed and exacerbated, increased the wildness of the place. And the idea was in America that as we moved west and as we conquered wild country, we might transform it again from a wilderness into a garden. Maybe we'd even recover or reclaim the Garden of Eden. Maybe we could make up for that original sin. Adam and Eve in their covered wagon, you know, heading across Wagon Wheel Gap toward Aspen. Let's build a ski resort. The word reclaim is really interesting. We use it a lot. You've heard of the Bureau of Reclamation, right? Bureau of Reclamation. What do? They dam rivers. They irrigate land. They build a garden in a wilderness. Think about that. So in doing so, it's much more casual than just producing crops. It's redeeming the species. It's making up for original sin. Conquering the wilderness became a religious act in American history, so the biases against wilderness were very strong. And that's why, as a historian, I believe that it is a miracle that we like wilderness as much as we do. People say, well, isn't it a shame we don't have more wilderness? Well, I think it's a miracle we have any at all protected and preserved, given the 10,000-year background of hatred and panic and fear of the howling wilderness. It was always called a howling wilderness. There's some wolves right over there below that line. Howling wilderness. So the miracle of appreciation began after this long dark bias. The miracle of appreciation began with aesthetics coming out of Europe. The concept of the sublime. It's not a word we use often today, is it? Sublime. We don't say that was a sublime run or sublime mountain. But it was a very important word because it had to do with the power of God manifested in nature. People were beginning to think maybe that is sublimity. And so European painters and writers began to look to the mountains as not something gloomy and not something possessed of the devil. Some of the biggest mountains in Europe were called the devil's ass, or the warts and pimples on the face of the world. They didn't think of mountains like our mountains here, Castle, Cathedral, Pyramid, as spectacular mountains that somebody would want to climb, all 54 of them. But they thought of them as pimples on the face of the earth, deformities. But now a new aesthetic said, hey, they can be beautiful. And up there you can perceive sublimity. Another big factor in the rise of appreciation of wilderness was the spiritual concept, that you could draw closer to God in a wilderness environment than you could in a city. We think about Ralph Waldo Emerson, we think about Henry David Thoreau in that connection. We think about the idea of cathedral mountains. Remember the guy who climbed Cathedral Mountains, saw silver skies below, lived right here for a while. John Denver, of course. So people starting to talk about cathedral mountains, you know, before they had been the devil's mountains, and now cathedral mountains. So that would represent a huge change. Another factor, big factor in the rise of appreciation of wilderness, we're talking 19th century here, was the unique role that wilderness had in American character and culture. We were somewhat embarrassed as a new nation because, after all, Europe had been going a lot longer. It had big cathedrals and museums and churches and universities, and we didn't have very much. Hey, but we had some 14ers. We had the Grand Canyon, you know, we had Niagara Falls. And so people began to think, you know, it was those wild features of the New World that made it special and different, and gave it perhaps the basis for a new art and a new literature. The work, say, of Thomas Cole or James Fenimore Cooper was more American when it dealt with the wilderness. And finally, big point in rising appreciation of wilderness, turning it from a liability to an asset, was scarcity. As civilization spread across North America, wilderness was transformed from a liability into an asset. And the key date that you need to play with on this is the date 1890. What happened, Elliot, 1890? He doesn't know, but I think he really does. The ending of the frontier. The census said no more frontier. And that was a shock for Americans. No more frontier. We've always had a frontier line out there. You know, first it was in Indiana. First it was the west side of Plymouth Rock. Then it was in Indiana, and it was out further and further. And finally the census said, no mas, we don't have a frontier anymore. And at that point people began to think, you know, wilderness was once dominant, and now it's getting rare. Now we're dealing with just scattered remnants. And that really changed our attitude, the scarcity theory of value, right? So those were factors that created an anthropocentric case for wilderness. It was all about us. If you have that handout in your lap, which you do, it says, why wilderness? And right next to it, it says, it's not all about us. Well, it was pretty much all about us in these early days. Scenery, recreation, getting away from it all, getting away from the cities, which suddenly had become big and ugly and maybe not very healthy and certainly not very godful and certainly not very pretty. But in the wilderness, we could find those things. So scenery, recreation, and the economics of nature tourism. Yellowstone, 1872, created as a national park because the railroads thought we can bring a lot of people out here and make some money transporting them out and build hotels. This is just sort of a wasteland. Let's turn it into a park. And by the word park came from that old Persian word like garden, Eden. And a park was a beautiful manicured place. And we still use it, don't we? Amusement parks, baseball parks, and nice flat level land like Estes Park, right? South Park, Echo Park, just to name a few that we've seen and have heard about. Unfortunately, in some ways, the term park was used for national parks, for places like Yellowstone, because people went and thought, hey, this is a park. How come there just was a forest fire? These trees burned down. You know, this is supposed to be a park. Don't you people take care of the park? Well, see, park reeks of garden a little too much. And maybe it should have been called a national wilderness rather than a national park. But anyway, we had this scenery, recreation, economics, and it lay behind the early national parks, and those arguments lay behind the first of the wilderness preservation steps that we did in the 20th century. But I think we can do better than scenery, recreation, economics. Okay, and to understand this, let me just talk for a minute to the men in the audience, okay? Just women, don't listen to this for a minute. Most guys, at one point or another, usually at night, have been asked by a woman, why do you love me? Why do you love me? Uh-oh, here it comes. Why do you love me? Well, three responses that aren't going to work well are scenery, recreation, and economics. Okay? Am I right? So what can you say, guys? What should you say? And it's really the reason what we should say about wilderness. It's, you have intrinsic value. It's not utilitarian. You have a right to respect because you were there. You're fulfilling your destiny. It's not about me, baby. It's about you. That's what you say at 3 in the morning. Maybe. Anyway, it's about you blossoming and flourishing and having a role and being a miracle in the ecosystem. That's what you tell her. She's a miracle in the ecosystem. So we can move on. That's what I tell you, isn't it? And you can move on from this anthropocentric scenery, recreation, economic, it's all about me. We can move on to it's all about you, and it's all about sharing the planet. And that's the ecocentric case for wilderness that I think we are beginning to enter, beginning to explore, where we regard nature as a community, not a commodity, where we talk about the rights of nature, where we talk about environmental ethics, where we look upon wilderness preservation as restraint, as a TO, timeout, and as a time when we practice sharing wilderness preservation as a gesture of planetary modesty on the part of a species notorious for its selfishness. We've been pretty selfish, you know, as a species. What species would resent our disappearance? Let's pass an Endangered Species Act for them. You know, they were such good neighbors. We loved them here in the Roaring Fork Valley. They don't, you know? So this is a way wilderness of maybe leveling the playing field. Okay, now we've sketched over 10,000 years. We're going to jump into a little fun. Going to have a little fun. And what I'm going to do is ask Allison, no? Yes, hi Allison, to just dim those lights a little bit. And we're going to go back a little here. I don't know why these things creep through. Just having a little trouble here. Okay, third edition of Wilderness and the American Mind. This is the book some people said is the book of Genesis of the environmental movement. I don't know about that, but a lot of people do come up to me and say, that book changed my life. That book changed my life. Thank you for that book. A lot of people say that. And now we're going to take a look at the view from my bedroom window. for 18 years. That's actual brick wall, 10 feet across. I was a city kid. I was born in a small village in New York called Greenwich Village. You know, it's part of the Big Apple. I was actually born on Manhattan Island. You know, a lot of people say they're New Yorkers when they really weren't born on Manhattan. I was. And, you know, that's, look at the, ooh, I got to use my laser. That's way over here, right? That wall is almost on this edge. So I couldn't see a single living thing from this window, not a leaf, not a blade of grass. I couldn't see a star at night, not a single star. And I grew up thinking that this was, well, you talk about a linear left-brained environment, huh? There it is. Talk about control. There it is. That's the wall right about there. It was on the 10th floor of a building in New York. My father was a professor at New York University, right in there. But this kind of environment produces interest in wilderness. Why? Because wilderness is rare, scarce. So you won't be surprised to know that Theodore Roosevelt lived right over here. And a kid by the name of Bob Marshall, some of you know him from the Bob Marshall Wilderness area in Montana, right up in there. So city kids who became lovers and defenders of wilderness, coming out of an urban environment, right? That's where they come from. So in a way, and I want you to take this with you, America had to become civilized enough to appreciate wilderness. In the early days, wilderness was too big a presence, civilization was too small. So that's what we're beginning to see now is in this kind of environment, wilderness has scarcity value. And you could see somebody who lives on one of those streets saying, I want to go camping in a national park. I want to get away from it all. And that's what they began to do. Like Otis and his friend here, opting out of your, opting out of your middle class values and polluted environment, we're going to the forest to be raised by wolves. And hey, what's going on here? Who can tell me what this is? Oh, that's great. It's wonderful to be talking about wilderness near the wilderness. Romulus and Remus nursing on the she-wolf. You know the legend that Rome was founded by Romulus and Remus. And the greatness of Rome was related to these wild roots. But when Rome declined and fell, and you remember Gibbon's great history about that decline and fall of the Roman Empire, when it declined and fell, it was maybe because it lost those wild roots, became over-civilized, declined into jacuzzis and racquetball clubs. The barbarians came sweeping in from basalt, wiped them out. So think about that, Aspen, you know. You get too civilized, you get vulnerable. Will we hear it? You know, isn't this great? See that? He's sitting on the couch watching Monday Night Football. It's the call of the wild. You gonna take it, dude? Well, I took it, and one of the places after I left New York that I went out to, walked across it, not R2R as Ted and Christy, but walk, one way, was the Grand Canyon. And I started there when I was about 8 years old, and walked across it a couple times. Later thought about the river, later thought, this is just because I kind of like to look at these pictures, you know. And this is what we do down in the Grand Canyon when we run rapids. Let's just take a look at this one right here. You can see the constriction caused by this side canyon. The river, of course, is going this way. And for those of you who haven't been down there, who think the Roaring Fork has big rapids, let's just take a look. Here's a moderate-sized Grand Canyon rapid called Badger Creek, one of the first big ones we come to. See that little tongue right there? I want you to look at that tongue. Sorry I'm shaking so much here, but I'm just so excited about being with you tonight. This is what we call the tongue of the rapid, and we are now on that tongue in boats that we call what? What do we call these boats? Dories is right. We call these dories. They're open boats about 18 feet long. And they are going down the tongue of the rapid. And now we're in a rapid. This is my dory, the Canyon Dancer. There are 5 people in there somewhere. So, and catching some air in a rapid called Hermit. Okay, so get there if you can, soon, if you can get to the Grand Canyon. It's not completely wild because of the fact that we have a dam up above it called Glen Canyon Dam, and all that water's coming through a dam and it's being released by the Bureau of Reclamation. They're reclaiming it, for God, for gosh sakes. So here we have, remember this is supposed to be fun, P-H-U-N, right? This is supposed to be fun and part of the talk. And remember I talked a little bit about definition. I talked about wild and civilized. I talked about keeping the wild out. This is a thorn manada. Those are goats, those are cattle, and these are thorns. And outside is the wild animals, where the wild things are, lions and so forth. Inside are the animals whose will we've broken, and so they are controlled, or as we would say, domesticated. So there's a perfect example of how we draw lines on the land, and we draw lines in our mind, and we talk about control, and we talk about resisting the wild. That's why wilderness appreciation is a miracle, because of the long bias we had here. A little bit of glance at American history. I know you can't read that, but I know what it says. The two Puritans on the Mayflower, and one says to the other, religious freedom is my immediate goal, but my long-range plan is to go into real estate. Oh yeah, we understand that, don't we, huh? Up here in the Roaring Fork Valley, my long-range plan is to go into real estate. And when you go into real estate, you put up ridiculous signs like this, you know? What do you do for a living? Well, I sell the earth. We sell the earth. There he is, open for business. So that was one of the things, the commodity idea of land, nature as a commodity, an I-it relationship. Strike it rich, transformation of the land, only a buck, you can learn how to do it. This is American as apple pie. We thought it would never end. Cornucopia, this is an ad from the 1880s, railroad company. Look at that. Cornucopia of the world, room for millions of immigrants. They think a little differently now, don't they, out there in California? And look at this. I love this. A climate for health and wealth. Without cyclones or blizzards. I think it actually says buzzards. But you know, don't ask the Donner Party, but that's the way, that's what we believed for a long time. And here's, you know, typical, this was a decade or so ago, but this is the solution to shortages. That's the world, folks, cut in half like an orange, squeezed out. That's really what we believed for a long time in this culture. And there's Arlene's Peak, the Matterhorn. You know, we can move the mountain, just tell us where you want it moved. Here's a picture that says it all. This is a great picture. Am I running out of time? Nah. This is American Progress, 1869, an important year because in that year the transcontinental railroads were completed. And when they were completed at Promontory Point, Utah, anybody tell me the date? Who knows the date of the completion, the driving of the Golden Spike at Promontory Point, Utah? I'll be impressed if anybody knows that. Take a shot. You only got 365. Probably in the summer. Good thought, but it was actually May 10th. And across that, 2 weeks later came one of my heroes, John Wesley Powell, with his boats to run the first descent of the Colorado River through Grand Canyon. First descent if you discount James White, who probably did it 2 years before. Anyway, there come the railroads right there, see them, across the plains. Here's Miss America, very scantily clothed for 1869, but holding the Bible. That redeems her a little. And the telegraph wire, see, that she's got stringing out behind her. Here are the surging storm clouds, the snow-capped peaks of the Elk Mountains. There's Aspen, okay? And into the mountains go the Indians, go the wolves. Here's the miners. There are the covered wagon people. And here's the stagecoach. And this is light and this is dark. And this is the American Manichaean morality play of westward expansion. that we are redeeming the garden, that we are going from darkness and bringing the light into the darkness. And look over here. See those boats, and there's a river? That's Manhattan Island, and you can up there very faintly see the Brooklyn Bridge, which was being completed at this time. And if you look really closely right there, you can see the wall that I grew up staring at. So there, and remember the title of this was called American Progress. There was no doubt in our minds in 1869 that this was progress. Now there's a lot more doubt. Now there's a lot more concern about over-civilization, about maybe we should go a little slower, about maybe there should be a little more balance in the interest of sustainability. Let's talk about some of the good guys for a minute. 19th century, July 4th, you said the date, 1845, Thoreau goes to Walden Pond. He chooses July 4th, same reason Arlene and I choose it, to leave town, avoid the fireworks and the parade, and climb a peak. And we do that because we're not so sure we want to celebrate everything about America. And Thoreau wasn't either. He didn't like a lot of things about America in 1845, including slavery, including materialism, including our treatment of the Indians. So he went to Walden Pond to live deliberately for a couple years and wrote Walden. Of course, he was totally ignored. People paid no attention to him in 1845 or in 1851 when he wrote his great essay, Walking, and in that said, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." It took a long time for us to realize what that was all about. But Thoreau was a prophet, and in time, his ideas would be more widely disseminated. Who's this? John Muir is right. Nice. John Muir, pretty cute guy, huh? And John Muir going to the University of Wisconsin for a while, heading west in 1868 to San Francisco, going into the Sierra, and in the next 2 or 3 decades becoming one of the great publicizers of wilderness. 1892, 2 years after the ending of the frontier, Muir becomes first president of the Sierra Club. And that organization goes on to transform attitudes and behavior about wilderness. There's Muir as an older man when he was president of the Sierra Club. This really says it all, what I've been talking about. Remember I talked about scarcity theory of value? Look at that, that's virgin forest, 1620. Let's just take a little look down time here. 1850. 1926, you know it's getting even thinner. So we are talking, here's the one picture that says 1,000 words. We are talking about a once wild continent perceived as wild, now just remnants. That's the scarcity theory of value. That's why our wilderness policies, like the Wilderness Act of 1964, are so special. Who's that? Theodore Roosevelt is right. What a guy. Good for you. At Harvard, when he was captain of the wrestling team. Went on to become a great exponent of wilderness values. Here we see him with John Muir standing on Glacier Point. And Roosevelt, with his personification of the strenuous life, with his message that perhaps America had become over-civilized and needed the fundamental frontier virtues, needed contact with the wild, needed to be raised by wolves. Come on, those people paying attention here. There's going to be a midterm. Let's try. Dan, here we go. Roosevelt pouring hair-growing tonic on the balding pate of Uncle Sam. This was, of course, the conservation idea, save the forest, Gifford Pinchot. And he says up there at the top, Uncle, you got to be careful, you're getting mighty thin on top. The conservation idea, very utilitarian. We want those natural resources. I hate the word natural resources, you know. You wouldn't call your girlfriend a resource, would you? So here's Roosevelt. In 1902, was taken down to Mississippi on a bear hunt. And because bears were a little scarce, somebody chained a bear up right here, this little cub, with a chain, and Roosevelt was brought out. There he is, Mr. President, get him. And Roosevelt raised his gun, and then he lowered it, and he said, something's wrong here, this isn't right. And he walked up and he said, release that bear. And here the guy is, release the bear. Roosevelt says, no, I'm not going to do that because I'm a sportsman and I have a different attitude toward animals, and I am a believer in national parks and national forests. And there was an enterprising artist around at the time who sketched this bear cub and Roosevelt, and that of course became, you see where I'm going with this, the teddy bear. The toy was made by a Brooklyn company based on this story, which was a true story, and the picture of the bear, and that was the bear, the teddy bear that almost all of us have had some contact with, Theodore Roosevelt's bear, the teddy bear. Another little sideline is, you can see the chain is around the neck of the bear. There was also, you see it says here, drawing the line in Mississippi. And what that also meant, double entendre here, was that lynching was going on of black Americans. And so this is a black creature, the noose around its neck. Roosevelt also opposed that. So this is an interesting cartoon that expresses a lot of historical ideas. In 1913, we have the most popular American writer ever publishes his big signature piece, and it's just about the ideas that I'm talking about here tonight. It's post-frontier. 1890, frontier disappears. This is 1913. This, of course, would be Edgar Rice Burroughs writing the Tarzan sagas. Tarzan of the Apes. Okay? You all know the story. Super story, right? The two English aristocrats on the boat. The boat is, I guess, is a mutiny. They put him ashore. She's pregnant. She delivers a baby. He's raised in the jungle by wolves. No, that's what my students used to say because they got it confused with Romulus and Remus. They didn't pass if they said wolves. Raised in the jungle by apes. And his mother, whose name was what? Jane is very good. Jane is the mother. And they had a boy. What was the boy's name? Boy is right. Very good. The monkey, what was the monkey's name? Monkey in Tarzan. Called Cheetah. Hey, see, you people really do. Cheetah. This is still a hugely most published American and circulated American short story. And the point about it is that Tarzan comes out of a civilized environment, goes into the wild, and becomes a Superman, a danger mouse. 2 or 3 of us know what that means. Here's John Muir kneeling in the grass, talking to people in the Sierra Club who've gone out of the cities and are here to hike. And look at them, they've all been told to bring their hats. They're walking. This looks like Dan Grant taking a tour out, doesn't it? Look, here are the walking staffs. And, you know, some of these people are wonderful. Let's have a little close-up of, I'm really frustrated by this, but I went too far. Here are 2 ladies who turned out for the tour, Dan's tour today. This is one of the ACES tours. And you see they have their little bags. They have their cravats, very little, nice little ascots, would you call them? And look at this. The lady has her spoon and fork tucked in her boot. Look closely. That's her spoon and fork. She's going out on a camping trip. Where are you going to carry them? A good idea, put them in your boot. Maybe not so good. But that's where she is. They also have on their belt a diabolical thing called a Sierra Club cup. Awful piece of equipment. Burns your mouth, tippy, the whole deal. But there's the Sierra Club cup. So this was 1908. This was about 1908. The guy who took the first automobile to Glacier Point in Yosemite. Americans were going outdoors. They were getting away from it all. Attitudes were changing, but sometimes in very strange ways. There's Half Dome right there. The guy is 6 inches from a 3,000-foot drop. See, he's got a piece of wood under his wheel, like that. The American flag, and look at him, beatific, staring out into space. But I've always liked his girlfriend here, hands on her hips. You know, what a doofus. Look at him. So, I thought you might like to see the first RV. You see a few of them rolling into the Roaring Fork. There's the first RV. That's a sleeping bag. That's why people didn't backpack much back then. But you know, this is all fixed up as a camping vehicle. Little sticker on the back: if it's rocking, don't bother knocking. The whole. You're not taping this, are you? National parks, who should have been leading the way to a more sensitive attitude toward wild animals and wilderness, in fact, seem to go just the other direction. They built a counter out here for the hotel to dump garbage. This was in Yellowstone. And look, bleachers for the people to sit. This is called nature tourism circa 1920, not ACES circa 2012. And there's the Final Four down there. We're about to see them in this coming Sunday. Strapping it out over tuna fish cans, and the people witnessing this show. And another big sweepstakes question, if anybody gets this, I'll be very impressed. A man sitting in the front row here with a gun over his lap to protect the tourists from the bears, later became President of the United States. Who was that man? Gerald Ford is right. He had a little connection with Aspen too, didn't he? Gerald Ford. Thank you very much for that. I owe you a margarita. And so, you know, people did crazy things with bears back then. And now it's different, right? Funny, isn't it? Huh? They got busted. See, he took off his bear costume. Do not feed the bears. They had their picnic basket. Give him that sandwich, you're busted. So anyway, huge transformation in attitude toward wilderness. Now you can go out there and fall in love and toast your relationship with a Sierra Club cup. Dan, are you around? I'm really stalled out on this now. Who's that? Aldo Leopold is right. Sand County Almanac, 1949, became a bestseller in the 1960s, talking about a land ethic, talking about an ecocentric perspective. We're just talking about some heroes. Who's that? Rachel Carson's good. Yes, very good. 1962, Silent Spring, reminding us that in an ecosystem, you don't just do one thing, you do a lot of different things, and some of them are bad. And Rachel Carson, one of the heroes of 1960s environmentalism, one of the heroes in our moral transformation of attitude. Interesting how women have led the way here, as they have in Aspen, in many of the environmental organizations like the Wilderness Workshop. If you think about 1852, you have a woman, Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote the book Lincoln Said Caused the Civil War. It was about slavery and about the ethical wrong of slavery. Rachel Carson wrote a book 100 years later, 1962, about the imprudence and the ethical wrong of nature slavery, you might call it, and of using the environment, putting pesticides and poisons into the environment. So think about those two women, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Rachel Carson, 100 years apart. And we all know who that is, at least a lot of people do. Edward Abbey, 1975, a monkey wrench gang. Ed's just plugged a TV here with his gun. Pretty good shot, huh? And what lent dynamite force to Abbey's work was that people really were serious about protecting nature. They were going to go beyond the letters to the editor. That's a book I wrote about environmental ethics. And that stuff, but we're going to move ahead a little bit to Portland, Oregon, Mount Hood. The light's growing up. It's getting harder to find a place to be raised by wolves. And it's getting harder to find a place for wolves to be raised by wolves, even though they're starting to spread a little bit through Oregon down into California. Just last week, OR7 made it to California, a male looking for a mate. He's not going to have much luck, but at least he's trying. Okay, Bill Anders went around the moon 1968, and I talked to Bill Anders after that, and I said, Bill, what was it like to go around the world? And he said, well, around the moon and look back at the Earth. And he said, you know, I could hold up my thumb like you can do in the audience and blot out the Earth. Anders did that actually from the space capsule. Remember, it was Christmas Eve. He read from the Old Testament. He read from Genesis. And he said, you know, I did this, and I'm at this environmental conference where you are because I think it's a long way to the next watering hole, and I think we ought to start treating the world like a spaceship. And it's now kind of a cliche, isn't it? Spaceship Earth. But that's when it really began, kind of, with that sort of around the moon, and then later Louis Armstrong landing on the moon. And what? My students would always write that down, you know. With a name we'll never forget, Neil Armstrong. That's one small step for the saints go marching in. So we are wrapping things up as we look at Spaceship Earth. And you could pop the lights on, Allison, if you could again. We are wrapping things up, and I'm going to suggest a few serious ideas as we conclude tonight, and that is that I think we are at a crossroads in the history of evolution on this planet. I think we're kind of at a crossroads between greed and growth and exploitation and collapse on the one side, and humility and restraint, diversity, community, sustainability on the other. And with great power comes great responsibility. With great intelligence comes great responsibility. We have been gifted as a species. We are indeed the sapient apes. We aren't acting very wisely. It seems to me we aren't exercising that power with moral control. My students a few years ago wrote a personals ad, you know, kind of like for eHarmony.com. This was an eHarmony.com for the universe. And it went like this: temperate but endangered planet, enjoys weather, photosynthesis, continental drift, glaciation, seeks caring long-term relationship with intelligent life form. Think of that. We know right now, we've been talking about other planets out there, right? Maybe extraterrestrial intelligence. Here's the Earth saying, I want a caring relationship. I like pina coladas. Remember that crazy song? Remember that crazy song? Walks in the Rain. They each put in a personal ad. You know what? Am I talking? You know what I'm saying. This guy does. They each wrote a personals ad and each answered it. The couple that was breaking up, get it? So the Earth was looking for somebody to love, somebody who would love it. And maybe it still could be us. Maybe we could become caring rather than cancerous. Maybe we could occupy the planet in a different way. I'm a professor of history, and the big picture interests me, deep time interests me, legacy, heritage. What is our civilization going to be remembered for? You know, like the Sumerians are remembered for writing, Rome's remembered for its architecture, Renaissance for art, music. There are a lot of things that, you know, American civilization might be embarrassed to be remembered for, like Indian policy, slavery, Dust Bowl of the 1930s, August 6, 1945. But there are also some pride categories, I think, that we'd like to be remembered for. And you see where I'm going with this, don't you? Free public education, something we did, different. Literacy, universal. Baseball, jazz. And I think the national park idea and the wilderness idea. 1872 and 1964, and maybe the Endangered Species Act, 1973. An American invention, we led the world, first nation to do those things. National parks, legal protection of wilderness, draw a line in the sand. So at the national level, we had those sorts of acts to be proud of. At the local level, we've had implementation by groups like Wilderness Workshop and ACES, the Audubon people. And let's celebrate the people of a locality like this who have built a legacy of restraint and, like you, have given nature a chance, acknowledged its rights, chance to be remembered in history for something as positive as protection of the self-willed world. Thank you for being here tonight. Hey, I want you to look. It's exactly 8:30, because people say professors are long-winded, but you know what? if you've ever been to college, you know professors aren't long-winded because the buzzer goes off, the period's over, it's an hour, it's 50 minutes, it's 75 minutes, the students are out. So you got to finish on time. God bless. Thank you.
We have time for one or two questions. If anyone would like that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Reverend's okay.